It's July 20th, and today I will be continuing the Dignified Hospitality series, looking at the cost of business, specifically around the regulatory costs. And that's, not just cost money-wise, but it's also administrative costs and other resources necessary to be in the food business and remain compliant within regulations. So I'll just be here today by myself today. I don't have any planned guests. If you want to join in, please let me know, and love to have you on and chat. But I figured this is going to be more of a presentation about, what are the certain things that entrepreneur that wants to be in the restaurant industry, and not just restaurants, but also the food industry, what are the things that they have to be mindful of and have to consider in their startup cost as well as their maintenance cost of running a business. And here in Southern Nevada, which is where TLED is located, and within the jurisdiction that our business has to be compliant in regards to health code and to food safety. And we work on a fiscal year schedule. So actually right now, beginning of July is the start of the new cycle for the food establishment permit program that they have. So I'm actually waiting for, and have been waiting for some time now. Hi, Belinda, good to see you. I've been waiting for our health inspector to come do their inspection here. Thanks for saying hi, Belinda. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a fun tax season. I saw you online motivating people to do their taxes. I love that you're always doing that. It's great. Hi, Marco. Good to see you. Talking about food. I'm talking about food regulation today. I'm going to kind of highlight what are all the different regulatory concerns that a food business, be it a food manufacturer, a warehouse, a distributor of food and importer, as well as a restaurant, or even the convenience store, a food retailer, what are the considerations and most importantly the costs? Because I've been using this Dignified Hospitality series to develop a manifesto of where the food industry can go. Not to say that this is, the ultimate solution, but, I've been talking over the past several weeks with different professionals within the food industry from different segments, from everything from bartending and serving to cooking to chefing to, actually owning restaurants and managing teams in restaurants, as well as vendors to restaurants. So that's like more on the industrial side and supply chain side, and kind of talking about what are the challenges and the issues that running these types of businesses had before the pandemic, and then also what issues have come since pandemic, which has been huge. And actually the food industry has been the hardest hit in everything that we're dealing with right now. So yeah, I think now is the perfect time to make some adjustments, to make some assessments about what's working, what's not working, and what can we do as an industry, as well as, and today's subject will be mostly looking at this, as citizens that are represented with these, legal systems that are meant to protect us as citizens, but actually can be quite inhibitive of innovation and of sustainability in our food systems. And those are the food regulations. So just a little bit of historical background on food regulations here in the United States. There was a really famous book. I'm going to get the exact date right, because by Upton Sinclair, and that was written a long time ago. It was written in 1906. Wow, that's a lot sooner than I thought it was. But I know that it was what, it actually was originally published in January 25th, 1905. And it was like an expose on the meat industry, the meat packing industry, about contamination, even about workers' rights, and just how kind of barbaric the industry was. And that caused some major food regulation to come about. And actually kind of justified our, oh, well, so this is it. The Meat Inspection Act of 1906. So this was like the first, major food regulation thing that came along. And during the Roosevelt administration, there was quite a bit of more regulation that was brought about. And then over the years, there's been things added on to it and other programs added on to it. And most recently in 2017, well, I believe it was first voted on, again, I want to get the dates right. In 2010. It was passed by Congress in 2010. It was signed into law January 4th, 2011. But we didn't start seeing the first regulations being acted until 2015. And that's how like the food regulation system works. And so really, if we do want changes to happen to these bureaucratic regulatory systems around food, we need a lot of time, because first you have to get it passed as a law by Congress and Senate. Then you have to get it signed by the president, and then that is then given to our bureaucratic organizations, who would then write the actual laws that would enforce what the act is proposing that it does. And so yeah, this process takes a long time. And this most recent one is called the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA. So that's like you'll mostly hear it called FSMA in the industry. You'll say people, oh, is this FSMA safe? Is this FSMA compliant? That is just the name of the actual law that was signed by Congress. And then the regulations were proposed by the FDA. And these regulations were the most stringent food safety regulations that we've had enacted here in the United States in over 70 years. This time in 1906, when The Jungle was published and the public responded to that expose with stronger standards on food safety, was kind of the start of it. And it's really kind of gotten out of hand now. And not to say that we don't need to be concerned with food safety and concerned with holding food providers, restaurants, food companies, holding them accountable for food safety. That's absolutely correct that we do that. But the challenge remains, how limiting are, some of these requirements that food businesses have to comply with, and how much of it is actually just rigged against them. And there's a lot of criticism, and a lot of it coming from me directly. I have very strong opinions about the latest regulation, the Food Safety Modernization Act. I have a very strong, passionate opinion about who wrote that, who was motivated to write this regulation, because frankly, a lot of the stuff that got passed is really not improving the food safety of our food. It's justifying why big food should be the only one to survive, the only one that should be qualified to provide food to the public. And so what's unique about the Food Safety Modernization Act, there's 5 parts to it. That U.S.-based food manufacturers have to have full GMP programs, which they had to have before, and I'll go into detail about what GMP means and what's involved in that. But you also have to have HACCP programs, and HACCP is it's an important program for certain products, not so important for something like tea, for instance, very much not important, kind of irrelevant. And just, really causing a high administration need for these food companies to remain in compliance. Um, and then the other parts are in relation to foreign supplier verification. That, like, if you're an importer, and so this is the part of this new regulation that affects our business, not just Telet's business, but pretty much all of the food industry. And I've been saying since these regulations were first being written that it would cause a huge threat to the specialty tea industry, because specialty tea is coming from small scale artisanal family operations that are usually just happening in a very rudimentary fashion in a back shack at their property, at their home. They may be withering tea leaves just out in the open on the road. And so this foreign supplier verification uses a third-party audit system that your customs agent at the point of entry of your product would have to exist this certification, this third-party verified certification that the producers of the products that are being imported are actually having the same food safety compliance that we have in the United States. And so that's the same GMP, HACCP programs, and it's a black or white type of a thing. So in the U.S., for food companies, when it comes to the FDA only has bandwidth to handle 2% of all the food in the U.S. as far as like directly regulating, directly inspecting, directly touching, and being involved with 2%. And they, of course, prioritize things as well. And so tea, because of its low water activity and low susceptibility to, short shelf life and contamination, tea is actually very low on the, I see you, Belinda. Tea is very low on the priority list for the FDA to inspect and be involved with. So if you are a tea company here in the United States, it's actually very unlikely that you are going to randomly be inspected by the FDA. Versus when you're importing your product and this customs agent is checking that all the paperworks are there, it's a black or white type of a thing. And the FDA does not have to exert any bandwidth in order to verify that these foreign suppliers are being audited. And so not only do these foreign suppliers have to retrofit their operation and maybe hire some consulting to help them navigate these retrofits and these administrative programs that are there, they also have to hire the third-party auditor to come in and inspect their facility and issue the certification that would be used on their exports to the United States. Or else, if those certifications are not there, then the product will be returned. It won't be allowed entry into the United States. And so that's why this particular regulation has been a bit of a hurdle for us here at Telet, and also for us, in the industry at large, because shipments have been sent back ever since earlier last year. Our FDA customs agent here in Las Vegas has been requiring higher levels of documentation and accountability for the products that we're bringing in. And I have yet to have a shipment returned myself, returned to the producer. But I have heard stories of other companies that had their products returned because the documentation was not correct. Now, I've had the FDA agent call me and tell me, they needed certain documentations, and thankfully we were able to provide those. But there is a severe threat of your products not making it here into the States because of this regulation. So you do have to be mindful on these. And, if you're a early stage tea startup and you're thinking about importing directly from the grower, I would highly recommend that you become knowledgeable on this regulation and make sure that you're in compliance, because you could learn a very expensive lesson in business and how this is all working. But today I want to really more focus on restaurants, because this is about hospitality. This is about the restaurant industry. And the FDA doesn't concern restaurants too much. I mean, the FDA would definitely be concerning of the vendors that supply restaurants to make sure that those manufacturers are, up to compliance. But, a restaurant is not dealing directly with the FDA. A restaurant is not having to have a HACCP program. Although, interesting little history fact about the HACCP program, it was developed by NASA. They were the original ones that came up with the idea of a HACCP plan. HACCP translates to Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And so this is a program that a food manufacturer will develop where they look at all of the processes that they use and determine at each step in the process, is there a critical point where you can reduce the chance, you can significantly reduce the chance of contamination or of, defect in your product. And really focusing more on the foodborne, microorganisms, or even it could be physical contamination or lots of other things, and determining what are the limits that would need to be reached in order to significantly reduce the potential of contamination. And how are you going to measure and calibrate to ensure that you're accurately measuring that you're hitting that standard every single time you're processing? So, a good example of this is like in the milk industry. You have to pasteurize milk. And that is a critical control point. The purpose of pasteurizing milk is to reduce the spores, is to reduce the bacterial load so that there won't be, contamination and spoilage of the product and potential harm to the consumer with that product. And so in a HACCP program, they will detail all the different steps, and they'll say pasteurization happens here, and this is a critical control point, and the pasteurizer has to have a temperature gauge on it that ensures that every single molecule of that milk that passes through that heat exchanger, that pasteurizer, has to reach a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. And there's scientific studies that prove that that combination of time and temperature is enough to kill, the certain amount of potential bacteria that could be in that milk, so that when you bottle it, you can be assured that it's safe to consume. And so HACCP programs are different product to product, factory to factory. So it's not necessarily a cookie cutter type of thing that you can just slap on to each factory. There is a lot of time and effort into developing these programs, understanding these programs, and there's still a lot of confusion around these programs. I mean, the fact that the FDA is now requiring all food companies to have a HACCP program in itself is not understanding what this program is. When this program was first launched, and again, it was developed by NASA because they wanted to develop a standardized way that they could ensure that the space food that they're sending up to space would have a safe shelf life for the astronauts as they consume that food. And then actually the first company that popularized HACCP was Jack in the Box. And this was after the big, foodborne illness scare, the E. coli. So they had a problem in their beef patties where, there were a lot of children actually that got very sick. I think they actually died. And so Jack in the Box had to really step up, and they were the ones to first adopt this program. And so now at Jack in the Boxes, and I think actually at all, big chain food restaurants, they have HACCP programs as well. So, for every single product that they make there, they have all the steps of how those products are made, how that hamburger is made, and standards of like the hamburger has to be on the grill has to be this temperature, and the hamburger has to be there for this long to verify that any E. coli, if it is there, is killed. And the same thing would happen for the meat packing plant that would be processing the beef for these hamburger patties. They would also be having their own standards of, how, even sanitation or even a metal detector could be considered a critical control point. It just depends on the product. Like, if the product has a high prevalence of metal contamination, then it is very important that you have a metal detector as part of the process. And in some cases, like the case of tea, really, to be honest, if you're a tea packing company, you have to have a HACCP program. And so many people, they write HACCP programs and they feel like they have to have a critical control point. With tea, you actually don't have to have it. You can use your GMP program and the general understanding of tea and have HACCP programs for the farmers, for the producers of the tea, to ensure moisture content of the tea could be it. You could say, okay, every batch of tea has to be tested, moisture content. If moisture content is at the right sweet point that you determine for that tea, that's going to ensure that no mold or bacteria can grow on it, then that could be considered a critical control point. But once the tea is here, really the only thing that can happen to that tea that could, affect the safety and the hazards of that tea would be a metal detector. The last step of packaging, just run it through a metal detector, and if it tests, to a certain degree of your metal detector, then you don't sell that product. That product gets rejected or whatever it is. But the thing about having that as your CCP, if you tell the FDA, this is my CCP for this hazard, then you have to not only measure every single batch to make sure that you're hitting that CCP, but you also have to calibrate your measuring equipment. And you have to do that frequently. And so there's a lot of extra administrative steps. You have to have your employees on top of it. You have to have your management teams on top of signing off that all of these things are happening. And so it's very bothersome. So HACCP is not something that you usually see in the restaurant community. And large chains, they will that like to have these standard operating procedures. You will see HACCP programs there, but for a restaurant, you typically don't see it. And the FDA typically doesn't work directly with the restaurant. Now, the restaurant does have food safety standards it does have to meet. And those food safety standards, to a certain degree, are more stringent than the FDA standards. And each county or city, it just depends. It's different everywhere you go across the country, will have their own regulatory bodies and regulations that you have to follow, licensing and permitting schedules that you have to follow. I'm not well versed on these programs, these food codes throughout the country. I am pretty well versed on the food code here in Southern Nevada, so I figured I'd look into those and let you know, if you are opening a restaurant, these are all the things that you have to consider. And this is really the reason why so much funding and capital is required up front when you're wanting to open a new food business, because you have to jump through all of these hoops. I'm feeling really energized today. I'm drinking some green tea now, so we'll see if that gets me even more energized. I get really passionate when I talk about this subject, because it's really cool. It's one of the biggest points of convergence between my past and my present. So my past as a food scientist, working in big food, I was oftentimes, managing these regulatory aspects. And that in itself is a huge expense too, that you would need a full-time administrative employee that usually are highly valued. A food scientist is very highly valued, even if you're freshly out of college. And ultimately, you're going to want one that has the experience, that they know what they're doing. They're not having to learn as they go. So that could be another additional $150,000 a year that your company would need to have somebody qualified, be it full-time on staff or even consultant, that would make sure that you're remaining in compliance. I'm not a big fan of big food. I don't know if I ever was. I never questioned it, but now I question the hell out of it. But it's interesting now, that I get to revisit these things and talk about these things again, because that was such a big part of my life, in my 20s was, understanding these things. So another question that I get often, and people are a little bit confused about, is the difference between the USDA and the FDA. So those are both two different bureaucracy administrations, below the White House. They're very different. They work on very different even languages. One of them is their code of federal regulations is number 9. The other one's number 21. So even their regulations are published in 2 very different places. The USDA handles more of like the agriculture part of it, more of the growing part of it, although they do regulate some, post-harvest regulations for certain industries, which is like the meat industry, I believe the egg industry, but then, the FDA covers the seafood industry and the milk industry. So, it's a little bit confusing. It's not just, all the way down the line of like, animal products versus non-animal products. There is some overlap and some confusion there. And the FDA operates completely different than the USDA. Their food safety standards are very different. But I believe ultimately, even if you are a meat packing plant and you have to have your USDA inspector on site, so that's another expense. Meat packers have to have a full-time USDA, officer. You have to have an office for them, and you have to pay their salary so that they can come in. When I used to work in a meat packing plant, our USDA inspector only visited, I think, like once a month, and they would come for just a few minutes to review the documentation to make sure everything was signed off and good, and then they'd leave. But we still had to pay their salary. We still had to have an office on site for them. So yeah, there's all these like little extra expenses that are kind of, I wouldn't say useless, but definitely not worth that value exchange right there. And so the FDA's regulation, the main one that causes the most frustration for a food company to manage, and these programs are typically hosted in a large binder, multi-page program that basically says, here are all of our SOPs that we follow to ensure that we are compliant with food safety and creating a food safe product. And then here's all the documentations where our management will sign off to verify that we are doing these things that we say that we're doing daily, that we say we're doing weekly, and that we say we're doing monthly or annually. So this is kind of a living document. It's not something that you just like publish and then here it is and we can work from here. It's like you publish it and you have to train all of your staff of like, okay, this is how we operate. Here are standard operating procedures. And then you have to have the management team signing off on it every day to verify that each of those steps are being followed to ensure a safe product. Within the GMP, so that stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. So from here on out, I'll just call it GMP. Within the GMP program, there are several different subparts. So there is organizations and personnel, buildings and facilities, equipment, control of components and drug product containers and closures. So that's more for the drug side. So with the FDA, which makes it even more confusing, is that they regulate only certain food products, including seafood and dairy, but that they also regulate drugs, like pharmaceuticals. And so the FDA is pretty far spent, and you can only imagine that most of their focus is dedicated towards the pharmaceuticals, because it's a huge industry, it's a huge need, it's very dangerous, and so yes, we do need lots of regulation and oversight in how our pharmaceutical industry is developed, but so this is for pharmaceuticals. All right, now I got it. Equipment, production and process controls, and defect action levels. So you have to have a program in there about how you deal with defective products and recalling and reworking. And within each of these, there's also, more. So there's defining, everything within your SOPs. What is a GMP personnel exclusions? Oh, I forget what that is. but it's something. And then within building and facilities, you have plant and grounds, sanitary operations, sanitary facilities, and controls. And like this stuff goes really deep. If you look at the programs and what the FDA is going to be holding you accountable for when they come inspect you, is in your sanitary facilities, like how often are you cleaning? Are you cataloging and inventorying all your cleaning chemicals? Are those things locked away? Do you have a program verifying that those things are locked away? And then even your cleaning equipment. So you should have like inside cleaning equipment, outside cleaning equipment, clean room cleaning equipment, and you color code all those cleaning equipment to make sure that a broom that's meant to be outdoors does not make it indoors, or a broom that's meant to be in your dry storage doesn't make it into your clean room. So that's why you color code all of these things, and all these details need to be like documented and outlined in this journal. Essentially, it's just a binder of all of these programs. So this stuff takes time. I do consulting on this, and I've consulted with different food companies, and it can take them months to set all of these things up. I'll come in and give them a template of what their document's going to look like, and then give them a checklist of like, here are all the things that you need to do to get into compliance. And then once you're there, then you need to do these like daily checkoffs with your management team to verify to the FDA when they come inspect you that you are managing these things. So, I keep reiterating all of this just so you see how resource intensive managing this compliance actually is. And they're expecting that like rural tea farmers in China are going to, that they're going to like follow all of this. So then we have equipment and utensils. Then within production and process controls, you have processing and controls, warehousing and distribution, and then your defect program. So just a lot of things to be mindful of. Now that's just for FDA. Now if you're a restaurant, you have to manage your local food code. So for Southern Nevada, we have an even deeper program that we have to manage. That goes into more, and then also is like the fees that you have to pay just to have them come in and inspect you and to manage all of your licensing. So in food establishment, we have management and personnel, food, equipment, utensils and linen, water, plumbing and waste, physical facilities, poisonous or toxic materials, compliance and enforcement, warehouse regulations, and then there's several other things, but these are more mobile food units. That's like food trucks, portable units for service. So there's just like other detailed regulations, but just for like a restaurant or a general food establishment, those ones I've listed off is what you have to be on the lookout for and develop programs for. Now, like those were really quickly to read off, but again, within each one of those is lots of detail. And here, like in Southern Nevada, and I know as well as other places too, like when it comes to like your water, plumbing, and waste, difference between being in the county and then also being in the city, which actually we are like right on the border. We're considered city of Las Vegas, while just one block that way, it's the county. And the county has required that any food establishment, no matter what you are, even if you're a dry warehouse, where you literally don't process anything, you don't touch any food, like everything that you distribute is packaged already. When it arrives to you, you just warehouse it and then you fulfill it for your orders. Even if you do that, you have to have a floor sink installed. Not even just a floor sink. I think a floor sink and a grease trap. They just made these blanket regulations. And a grease trap is very expensive to install. It can cost like $8,000, just to install that thing. And so unless you are moving into like a second generation kitchen that's already established, startup costs for a restaurant are very high because you have to think about all these things. Like if you're cooking food, you have to have a hood vent. And that can also be very pricey. And then on top of this, the pricing, then we have the actual fees. So, and for some reason I had trouble finding the fees because everywhere that I went, the links they had for Southern Nevada just takes us to how to like put your restaurant permit on hold during COVID. And they're actually charging you. They charge you a non-refundable $94 fee for you to put your restaurant permit on hold. I guess so they don't come inspect you and see that you're not operating. So like if you're temporarily closed because of the pandemic, then you would have to pay this $94 fee, and then you have to pay to like reestablish your permit when you reopen. Now, if you're starting from scratch and you have to have them, review your plan, your build out plan, and come inspect you before you're able to operate, that's very pricey. I know whenever I went for this particular location, which we have just a food processing permit. So I don't have a restaurant permit. We don't serve here. We're not serving food. All we're doing is, packing tea and having a warehouse and fulfilling it. So for that permit, with my review fees and everything, it cost us a little over $1,100 just to establish the permit here. Now every year I have to pay an additional $900 or $495 to manage this annual permit. That's on top of all of my county and state and city business licenses that I also have to maintain. So it's very costly. And when I first went for my first permit, there was a lot of work that I had to do to retrofit. And I wouldn't say that those retrofits that I made necessarily made my facility any more food safe than what it was before. It was just like administrative hurdles that I had to jump through. And stressful, I mean, even now I'm waiting for my inspector to come, and hasn't come, which is fine. They could roll up any second now. I might have to end this video and go deal with that, and we'd be ready for our inspection. I'm sure we'd do fine, but it's just an additional stress that I have to deal with that I don't necessarily think is making my food any more food safe than anyone else's. And there are several other tea companies, even here in Las Vegas, that are operating without permits or licenses and will never get caught or never get inspected and never have an issue with it. But, it's the cost of trying to do something legally, the cost of trying to do it right, is very expensive. But, for so many years, since I've started in this business, it is very common for tea companies to not be in compliance. And officially, what I'd like to say, to anybody that does work in tea and own their own business, I do recommend that you work in compliance, because the FDA does have the authority that if they... Yeah, so Brittany on Facebook says that she has to have 5 sinks just to make a cup of tea. Yes, that's true, and it's ridiculous. And so you're in Tennessee, right? So, these food codes are very similar. The fees, the licensing fees and whatnot are different county to county, especially the alcohol license fees. It just depends on the state of the industry and how much things cost. Like here in Southern Nevada, the alcohol service license fee is very expensive, versus what I've heard in New York City, I heard is also, much more affordable. You could easily, open up a bar and start serving alcohol, but here in Las Vegas, it is very, very expensive. Let's see, maybe I can find it quickly. $7,500. License fee, $700 semi-annual, and for every additional bar you want to have in your facility is another $400. So yeah, every year you're having to pay all these fees. There's more money to be made in alcohol. Oh, a full alcohol license costs $40,000. and then you pay $800 semi-annually, $750 for each additional bar on your property. If you're a restaurant and you want to have full service alcohol, it's $30,000. So that first one, that $7,500, is just for beer and wine. But if you want to have, a full bar, then you've got to start paying the big bucks. And a tavern license is $75,000 with a $1,200 semi-annual fee. So this is like just alcohol, very expensive. Again, you're going to have potential for higher profits, because, alcohol sells. But, in a time like this, you're still having to manage all of these fees. And right now here in Las Vegas, the bars can't even be open. So very stressful for those restaurateurs. It's really expensive to manage these things. And the reason why I think it's important to talk about this in the context of this Dignified Hospitality series that I've been working on is that if we really want to lower the barriers of entry and make a food service more accessible to, an increased community of people that are unemployed, that their whole livelihood and their whole skill set is around food, which is great. We need food. We need people to know food and know how to cook it, know how to produce it, and get it out. But, we are having a major culling of restaurants, lots of restaurants, permanently closing. A few weeks ago, I looked at the Yelp report, which said that 53% of the restaurants listed on their platform have permanently closed since the beginning of March. That's a lot of newly unemployed people that, yes, they'll be able to find other positions and other jobs, and that's a very valid part of the conversation here, is how to empower those professionals to find their confidence, to find the right position for their value and their skill set. But then, there's also the opportunity of these folks to become entrepreneurs, to become food providers themselves. But with these, high barriers to entry, it's a real challenge to think about that. If you wanted to just start a street food stall, I keep idealizing. I totally romanticize street food. And I think that there's a place for food safety regulation within that, right? So I think the challenge is going to be finding that middle spot where we can have the confidence in the public that things are safe, that the FDA and, the local food codes are keeping their products safe. But how can those systems be modified to support small-scale entrepreneurship? Because these licensing fees and compliance, having 5 sinks in your facility. I also have 5 sinks, Brittany. I have to have 5 sinks. I have 3 compartment for the dishwashing, 1 utility sink for, being able, a big sink to, clean mop water or whatever. And then the last one is the hand washing sink. And the hand washing sink has to be different than any other hand washing sink. It has to be, directly within a certain proximity to where your food processing area is. So I've got this area where I have this small little space. I have 5 sinks lined up. And, it's nice to have it, but it was a very costly thing. And, I've had to invest a lot of other things into retrofitting this space to remain in compliance. And so a small-scale entrepreneur that just wants to set up a small street food stall in current situation would not be able to do so. And unfortunately, though, if we did want to make some changes here, amendments to our food safety protocols, we would need a lot of time. And there are powerful organizations that pay top dollar for the best lobbyists in this country to make sure that these laws remain as stringent as possible. Because a big organization, let's say a Golden State Foods, so Golden State Foods is a very large food manufacturer that supplies all of McDonald's in the country. They make the ketchup packets, they make the buns, they make the cheese, they make everything. And they are doing such large business. Their supply chains are huge. They like internally, like regardless of the FDA or whatever food regulation, like internally, they need very strong protocols to manage their quality, manage their, just even efficiency and how their supply chain is working and waste product and all of that. So they have invested internally in all of these high administrative requiring programs, GMPs, HACCPs, cleaning SOPs, sanitation SOPs. And so, a big food company already has these programs in place because they need them for how large scale they are. And what they've done has been able to get the government to support them, to require that all food companies need to have these same programs in place. And a very small scale business doesn't need those things and is not able to afford those things. And so it's essentially, it's murder to small business. And it's really sad that it's being disguised as food safety. It's being disguised as, a public health requirement. So I think the rehaul that would need to be, implemented into our regulatory systems would be very broad. And it would require very strong leadership, to convince everybody that's needed. Because the people that are in a position, or the organizations that are in a position of influencing these types of decisions, as well as like the think tanks and the places of reference, including universities, right? So like university food science programs, agriculture programs are major consulting points for these types of regulations. They're all being controlled by, the big food that has these interests in mind. So of course they're influencing that these like huge protocols are required to, verify quality when it's not required. Mindfulness and good practice is required, but these ISO level certified requirements, they're good for big food, but small scale artisanal food is different. And when you're Anthony Bourdain says this, when he talks about street food, he says that when he's traveling internationally, like he prefers and he feels like it's safer to eat street food than it is to eat from your hotel buffet or from your hotel restaurant, because street food vendors, they're connected to their community. They're serving their community. They're serving their neighbor. They're serving their uncle. They're serving people that are going to be coming back to them every day. And so they're going to make sure that they don't get anybody sick. And a lot of street food vendors, they like cook to order, and so as long as you see the food coming hot, sizzling from the griddle directly into your service container and given to you, I mean, that feels pretty darn safe, and so yeah, that's what Bourdain had to say about it, is that when people are connected to who they're serving their food to, versus like the Jack in the Box, you go through the drive-thru, yes, there's a person there, but you're not really connected with them, and that the person that does connect with you is not connecting their craft of creating that food, of cooking that food for you. Hi Gabby, they're just following protocols, right? They're just following these HACCP programs, and that's what's going to keep you safe, versus this genuine connection and interest that they have for providing sustenance to you and also keeping you safe, because it's good for business. Keeping you alive is good for business, right? So, but yeah, we're very far away from having a regulatory system that supports this like smaller scale food production. So we had someone saying, Tisana T-Bar says it's very sad that the small business cannot always afford the healthy rules. That's true. And it inhibits a lot of really great food businesses from happening, right? Because, I have so many friends in hospitality that have a passion and a vision of opening a place. They want to open a restaurant. They want to open this casual hangout spot where they can provide food and beverage. And when they look into the details of how much it costs to set things up and what they need to know, and it's intimidating as hell. You read these regulations, like, what does that even mean? And so, that's where someone like myself, like a food scientist, would come in and consult on that. But that's not cheap. You know, average fee is about $200 an hour. So but if you're a big food company, that's nothing, right? But if you're a small scale business, it's just not possible. And so, we're missing out on a lot of really incredible food businesses just because of these regulations. And again, I'm not saying that these regulations need to go away. Like foodborne illnesses, pathogens, I mean, even viruses, like dealing with COVID, they are very serious threats to our food system. And a strong food system is going to be mindful of those things and have programs in place that are, but it's not rocket science, and if you're operating a huge factory that is dealing with tons and tons and tons of product, and that product is going to be distributed to, vector points all throughout the world, yeah, maybe we need some standardized protocol there, because there's a lot of room for error there. And the human connection in there is really depleted. So yes, you need to make sure that the humans that are in that system are following a certain protocol. And that's how you'll make sure they're doing a good job. But if this is just, someone in the neighborhood that's wanting to make something and share it with their neighbors, they're going to make sure that the product is clean and safe and healthy. And it's a lot easier to do that. Frying an egg and making sure that you fry it properly. Salmonella doesn't require huge temperature and time to be killed. It requires little bit. If you're working with a supply chain that's mixing product from thousands of different places, and one contaminated source can contaminate everything, then yeah, you need some systems. But in small scale food production, these systems are not as necessary. Things like even when I was in Hawaii, I did a lot of work with the elementary school systems and building school gardens. And it was kind of a useless task, because, you can set up a garden, and then you can set up like the sales systems, or even like the consuming systems that support the work required to make that garden. But it was illegal. It was against the food code for these schools to be able to process product, even harvest and like sell the fresh produce. It was illegal for them to do that. They would have needed to have all the food code things out, stainless steel everything, 5 sinks in their space, and everything else that they have to be mindful of. And so a lot of these school garden projects didn't have a lot of sustainability to them, because there was no value coming out of it for the students, or an economic cycle of supporting, the continued work. A garden takes a lot to manage. You can't just, oh, here's a couple $100, we set up the garden, it's good to go. It's like, no, it's an ongoing thing. So how to keep the value exchange motivated would be easily through, a program where the students could even sell it on campus. Like when I was in the Peace Corps and did the solar dryer project in the Caribbean, we were easily able to set up the sustainability, because the woodshop students that would make the solar dryers could sell those dryers themselves into the community, and it was not taboo. People thought it was cool to have this dryer box in their backyard. They could dry their own fruits at home. And then the home ec students would process the fruits. The ag students, of course, grew the fruits. And then the business students would package and label and sell the products. They made like dried fruit snacks, and they'd sell them in the cafeteria in addition to the other food that was being sold in there. And that was making money for them that they could then reinvest into buying more materials, planting more trees, so that they can continue that cycle over and over again. I don't think that there's anywhere here in the United States where a school could get away with that. Because, yeah, the food code, the health department would be coming in and saying, oh, like the solar drying, the fruit gets cut and then it gets placed on a tray inside this box. This box has ventilation system that is exposed directly to the outdoor air. And you want this thing sitting in the sun, so it has to be outdoors. Because the food product is directly exposed to outdoor air, it is not food safe. And it would never be food safe. The only way that you could retrofit that to become food safe is if that solar dryer is inside another space, a bigger space that didn't have ventilation, that had, all sealed. It had to be all sealed. So I guess you could put it inside of a bigger glass box that's all sealed to have some kind of filtration system on the air between the processed product, the fruits that are being dried, and the direct outdoor air. So, these are all just like the silly little nuanced things that make the food business so difficult. And food is like, we need it. So, yes, we need it safe, but we still need it. And right now, the direction that we're going in is, the only companies that are going to survive this struggle are going to be the ones that really don't care about what we need. You know what I mean? So, I'm glad that I got to go over this, and this is useful information for any, not just restaurant business, but, even if you are an aspiring tea business owner here in the United States, really important to know these things. And like I said, for the most part, if you're a tea company and you're packing tea in your house and you're storing it in your closet and you're just fulfilling it from your house, that's technically illegal. You should not be doing that. You could try to get your house approved as a commercial food space, but it's doubtful that would even be possible. And again, you may have to put retrofits into your facility to make that possible. But so many companies get away with it because tea is so low on the priority list, on the, totem pole of priorities. Tea is a dried product. No one's ever gotten sick from tea. So the FDA does not actively pursue those things. Now, if someone calls on you, if there's a whistleblower, and this happened to me actually, to be honest. It happened to me here in Las Vegas, where the health department just randomly popped in and they said, hey, we got a report that you're selling tea here without a permit. And I was like, interesting. I just moved into the place and I didn't think I needed one. I was not processing tea there. I still had a contract manufacturer that was processing tea. I was just having, I wasn't even having a warehouse. I was just having my office space in Las Vegas. And so I didn't get in trouble because they came and they saw what I was doing. But then I did choose to move from having the contract manufacturer to bringing all of my operation in-house. And so then I went through the official protocols into getting that licensing. But yeah, I got reported to, and that can happen to anybody. It could be a competitor, it could be somebody else in town that just, wants to try to do what they can to get rid of you. It was an absolute nuisance for me to deal with that. But, it's whatever. So that's why I suggest that you remain in compliance. Because you never know what, if a whistleblower, reports you, then you're going to have to deal with it regardless. And if the FDA comes and inspects you and you're out of compliance, they can completely recall your product and require you to completely recall it from the market, and they can shut down your business and make it illegal for you to operate. So it's just good to be in compliance. It's expensive, but it's smart. But, if things get better, as far as, these regulatory issues, maybe those costs and risk will go down. There is something, and you may see, you may question, I go to the farmer's market and, there's somebody that makes jams out of their kitchen. That's not, a food kitchen, a certified kitchen. How do they do it? A lot of counties have what's called cottage industry regulations. And as long as you are not, you're not selling a prepared food that's to be consumed right there. You're selling a prepared food that's to be consumed away. And then you also have to have a disclaimer on the label saying, this product may not be safe. It's, cottage industry. Then, yeah, you can do it. But, hi guys. There's limits to that too. I think a lot of counties give you only a certain time frame you're allowed to be cottage industry, or they force you to become like a legitimate food processing facility, and you have to go through all the typical channels. But the cottage industry rules are pretty good for startups, companies that maybe don't want to invest into into the full regulatory compliance, but want to test out a product in the market, at the farmers markets or whatever. But in cottage industry, you're only allowed to distribute your product within a certain radius. If you start distributing your product within, I think it's like 260-mile radius away from where your registered address is, then you are compliant within those FDA regulations, that Food Safety Modernization Act, which means then you have to have a certified kitchen, you have to have a GMP program and a HACCP program. So if you're wanting to start up a cottage industry thing and you get your cottage industry license, it is best for you to stay in your locality. Don't make an online store and try to sell, because once you do that, you put yourself in line, with being regulated by the FDA. Hi, Robert. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, lots of cool stuff behind the scenes to think about. Yeah, I just want people to understand exactly how annoying and expensive it is to have a food company, including restaurants. It's very expensive, and it needs to change. So you're asking what's in my Gaiwan. I have a green tea here. I think this is the Panacea. It's a green tea from Darjeeling. Really nice, delightful tea. Yeah, I should send you a link to it. We have a new website, Robert. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called teaanditspeople.com. It's a retail site, so it's like different. It's like a branch off brand, and website to Tealet, but it's retail, and it's where the community is hosted, including all of these videos that I do. There's a drop down menu, and it has all of these videos all listed with short descriptions of what is talked about. So, lots of other behind the scenes cool things I've been talking about over the past few months since the pandemic started. All right, so the link is there. You can see it, Robert. Pana green chia. It's a nice tea. This tea has been selling fast, actually. A lot of people getting into it. Mostly like cafes and restaurants getting into it, so that's always good to see. Robert, I hope you're doing well. It's been a while. It's been almost a year since I was in Chicago. I don't think I'll be going again very soon, but I'm having a lot of fun kind of hunkering down here in Vegas and learning more and developing more. I'll be hitting the road again once it's safe to do so. But I think that's it, guys. I mean, if you guys have any more questions, I'll stay on for a little bit longer if you want to ask. But I think I kind of covered the basis. The difference between a food processing facility and a restaurant, and the regulations and kind of startup fees and management fees needed to remain compliant. And all of these fees that I talked about, that's just for compliance. It's not involving all the other things you have to consider, mostly staffing, right? Like payroll costs is a huge one. But this $1,100 food facility plan review I had to pay just to start the process of getting my food facility permit here at Tealet, That $1,100 is like, it's pretty much just an administrative fee for, their offices to be able to process your request. That's not right. Like, there's two problems for that. And in either case, they're both problems. One of them is it's corrupt as fuck. It's like gangster mentality. They come shake you for your protection taxes or whatever. If that's the case, it's fucked up. In the other case, if they legitimately need that fee to manage their administrative overhead, that's fucked up too. It means they're not operating well. And I think that there's a lot of things going on in government that are like that. It's either corrupt or it's inefficient. And either way is bad, and either way needs to be addressed and reviewed and figured out how to evolve beyond it. Because we're going to have to, right? Like the current system is not going to be able to continue the way it has been. And that's the purpose of this manifesto. And I know today I didn't propose too many solutions, and I didn't talk to experts in the industry or stakeholders in the industry, but I'm glad I was able to do this. I was able to let you guys know exactly what is entailed in remaining compliant within a food business. So no more questions came in, so I'm going to be tuning out. It's a beautiful Monday, and I'll be seeing you all tomorrow. I'll have some tea education for you tomorrow. I don't know what I'll talk about, but if you have any requests, feel free to DM or email info@tlet.com. I'd be happy to see if I can oblige your requests.